Final stop, Brazil. Book 2, Life After Hell. Chapter 2, Penitenciaria Feminina da Capital. Finally the ride to uncertainty ended. The truck stopped, but we sat a while in the sweltering heat without anything happening. Since it was already quite cold in the mornings, Rosie had lent me her sweater. When I wanted to return it to her that same day, she waved me off. I should keep it since I had nothing else. She wanted to show me her appreciation for the favor I did her by passing on her letters to Mr. Waldman some time ago, shortly after her arrest. The only way for her to get in touch with her family, because the South African consulate did virtually nothing, and if they did, it was after a very long time. The reason for this is that the consulate is simply overloaded by the thousands of prisoners. Rosie had nothing when she came to Aruja, no paper, no stamp, no envelope, and no one helped her to write to her family. After the visit of Mr. Waldman, she hugged and kissed me stormy when I told her that her letters were as good as on the way. Now I was sitting in the cattle truck with a thick turtleneck sweater and sweating like crazy. Nadia and I finally performed almost a circus act together to take off the sweater despite the handcuffs. Then they finally allowed us to get out of the truck to be welcomed by a grim-faced police officer ordering that we shall position ourselves in a row. This way we waited now for the things coming. Nadia explained to me that we were in PFC. I tried to remember what they had told me in Aruja about the PFC. The statements had differed. Some wrote that they were heartbroken by the PFC. A guard, about my age, with a quite friendly charisma, came to us to explain that we shouldn't worry. It would be all right. He roughly introduced us the opportunities to work on and go to school. That gave me back a little courage. Yes, I wanted to work, and I wanted to educate myself in Portuguese. Now we were led individually into a room. I had to strip naked, then go several times in the squat. Then I received a white t-shirt and brown trousers to dress. Those old ugly shorts disappeared in my bag that had to be left in the corridor. They locked me and Nadia in a cell where we waited for what happened next. After an endless long time, I was taken out of the cell again for the inspection of the contents of my bag. The police officer asked if I had money on me. Truthfully, I replied, "Tenho dinheiro sim." When my nail clippers were confiscated, which Mr. Waldman had brought me, I got frightened by the thought about my toenails, so the drama with my nails would start again from the beginning. Then my writing materials were taken through the ringer. All envelopes were reversed. The book by Andrea, Memorizadas a Cadeia, Memories of Prison, searched page by page. Amazed, the female officer asked me if I was reading this book, to which I replied, "I'm learning Portuguese at the moment. This book I'm reading with help of those dictionaries," pointing to the 2 dictionaries Andrea's mother brought me. Before I continued, "It is not easy to read." The officer, who obviously knew the book, in her profession this book was probably an obligatory lecture, nodded, reaffirming, then turned interested to the German book of Sao Paulo that I received from Mr. Storm, and wanted to know about the contents. In fluent Portuguese, I told her about this book, presenting the state of Sao Paulo by topics such as history, culture, sport, education, in connection with the many Germans living here. She hit on any page to test me and asked me to translate this. It was about classical music. Without problems, I translated it. But not only that. Apparently, I had caught her absolute passion. So we talked about classical music, while the second officer was now looking at my photos, with too much interest for my taste, and threw in some questions about them. like where certain photos were taken and who those people were on the photos. Between Mozart and Haydn, I told her those were my friends from Sao Paulo. When I reached Johann Sebastian Bach, the second officer began to draw my photos out the little booklet. Since both of them were agreeing that I was very intelligent, came the inevitable question, why for heaven's sake I ended up in jail for. I reached my top condition, giving it all to tell them my story from A to Z. Fascinated, both of them listened, and my photos were forgotten about. Without minor interest, the second officer pushed the photos back into the covers and put the mini-album in the large garbage bag for the things I was allowed to take in with me. I beat the sweat on my forehead, but it was hot, and thus the two officers' women didn't suspect anything. Suddenly, the first officer remembered I had said that I had money with me. Once again, fully focused on their work, they wanted to know where the money was. I'm sure I put it in one of the envelopes. So all the envelopes were taken out again and searched. I didn't wait until they were finished, but acted as if I had previously remembered that I was not so sure whether I had taken that envelope with the money at all in all the excitement. I left a stack of envelopes there in Aruja with my friend. Well, she will be happy when she finds the envelope with the money included. Nothing to be done about it. It was only 20 reais anyway. All the envelopes had now been examined for the second time. The first officer looked at me a moment, but I responded to her look with an innocent smile. Then I was dismissed from investigation. In another room, I could pick up my bedding, towels, and a yellow uniform. It was pointed out that I could shower if I wanted back in the cell, which I actually enjoyed to have a warm shower for once. The shower in the Chis 3 of Aruja hadn't functioned properly since a long time, so there were only cold showers. Afterwards, I dressed this ugly yellow uniform, which made me feel like a German postman, as Nadia also returned to the cell. Of course, she wanted to know, first thing, whether I was discovered with the money. I roughly outlined the story to her, what idiots I had made of the two guards, while we poured out with laughter. Finally, I just commented that I was simply smarter than the police. After everyone else was finished to deal with the search, we moved on. The mattress-like form clamped on the left arm, the garbage bag in the other hand, I dragged myself by park-like grounds, a dangerous-looking Rottweiler in a kennel and shack-like buildings. I barely managed to keep up with the others, and was glad when one of these sapadois, masculine lesbians, helped. In the pavilion, too, Donna Isabel, a rather severe-looking black warden, received us. And just as she appeared was her tone, like in an army camp, in which she cleared us up what we had to expect during the next 30 days. With one or two other women in a cell isolated on floor 1, without a visit and without contact with other prisoners. This is indeed starting well, was my thought, as I looked over to the others who were in good spirits up to now, but stood now like drowned rats. During the climb up the steep stone stairs, I was glad that I was helped again by one of those muscle women, who balanced the bag and mattress in only one hand. Secretly, I hoped that I would not, however, clash with such a caliber like this. This was not Bridie. The other 7 women were already in agreement about who they wanted to share the cell with, so I allowed myself to be classified individually, which was actually much better for me, because I really didn't want to stay together with those from Aruja. They assigned me to a Magita, a very quiet and lovely Brazilian woman of my age. We introduced ourselves briefly, and I noticed that she certainly wasn't in the mood to talk too much. Thus, we complimented fine, and I was glad to have landed in her cell. With her, I would survive the 30 days like a play. Unfortunately, this should not be so. The day was almost over by the time I had myself orientated and organized. We were given food with a whole plate of salad, however, again rice and beans. Still, here the divided plates, bandejas, offered some quite good side dishes. Coffee and milk we were given only in the morning, no more after that. Fortunately, Margita had juice, biscuits, and chocolate powder, so I survived the first days very well. Friday, I kept myself busy with writing letters to Rosie, Michael, my mother, Mr. Sturm, Mr. Waldmann, Mrs. Bischoff. Saturday, I continued with writing letters to Andrea, Jasa, Yasmin, and Rosie. Suddenly, I remembered that I gave Jeff the address of Aruja, which was of course bad, but first I would have to wait anyway what Mr. Waldmann had to report, how Jeff's response had been. I hope to hear from Mr. Waldmann very soon. The cells here had a size of about 18 square meters. Right side of the door was a cupboard, on the left side a bed. Straight ahead behind, separated by a wall of about 1 meter high, or better said low, unfortunately. On the left, the toilet and the shower on the right. During the first days, it gave me problems to use the toilet, but Margita was using the opportunity to take a warm shower in the communal showers, which for me was the opportunity to go to the toilet, and therefore got back to regular motion, not as in Aruja, every 2 weeks. The water of the shower in the cell was cold, but I preferred this to having showers together with all the lesbians. With a book which I had received from Mr. Waldmann, I passed the Sunday very well. Monday was great commotion, as Margita explained to me that school was going to start. Well, whatever they called school. Actually, it was just a briefing, and some questions of the new arrivals were answered. Before we returned to the pavilion, too, Donna Isabel handed me a surprise. A thematic dictionary, German-Portuguese. The newspaper, Taz, only a week old, from Berlin. Writing paper, German magazines, and cigarettes. This all came from Claudia, who until then was the only German here. She had added a letter offering any help. All this stuff to read would last me for the entire week. There wasn't even any more time for studying. The Taz I read in and outside and sucked in all the information from Germany and the world up to date advertising. For months I was actually cut off from the world. With surprise, I read that Angela Merkel had now really been elected to the Federal Chancellor, and I asked myself if she would do better than Gerhard Schröder. The news of Germany didn't improve. There were still 5 million unemployed, 8 million unofficially. Sadly, I was thinking of Michael, how he could return voluntarily to this ailing country. In the afternoon, we were allowed for the first time to be an hour in the yard. We enjoyed the sun. Nature and I began to walk our rounds firmly every day for half an hour in the yard, since our joints had gotten pretty rusty in Aruja without any movement. Until sleeping time, I returned to my reading. The week went by pretty quick. I utilized the so-called school only to intensify my Portuguese by translating everything that was said to Sandra, a South African, exceptionally a nice one for a change. I found Margita crying very often. Sometimes she stood on top of the toilet staring out of the window, which was pretty high up, built into the wall, and only this way to reach, weeping quietly and secretly. One night I brought her down from there, explaining to her that she didn't need to cry secretly. I took her in my arms and comforted her when she then broke out in terrible sobs. Gently I took her to her bed, gave her toilet paper to dry the tears, talked with her, told her that it was no good to be reading nothing but the Bible all day, to be depressed and crying afterwards. From all the crying, you will be feeling sick and more depressed. But you want to return to your children in a healthy state. They need you, right? Try to think a bit positive and be a little happy. The previous days, she hadn't even come out into the yard, so I threatened her, tomorrow You will come outside with me into the yard, whether you like it or not." I made it clear to her that the sun itself did a lot for a little better mood, and then, to cheer her up, told her some funny stories from her life, until she was finally lying on her bed laughing. The next day she was surprisingly dismissed. We couldn't even say goodbye, because I was called at that time for an interview with a social worker, but I knew that she was grateful. I asked myself, though, where I was taking the strength from to build up and comfort others. It didn't take long until a new arrival was brought into the cell. Right away, she wasn't very likable for me. My intuition told me that I must be cautious with this woman. The first few days she was still bearable, even helped me during my practice of pronunciation of Portuguese. I read the book to her I had from Andrea, and she corrected me. But soon I realized that she didn't like at all when I was reading for myself or slept early. If she didn't get no attention, she began to wail like a toddler. Since I knew these were crocodile tears, I said nothing further on the matter. Instead, I pushed a Brazilian magazine in her hand with the command, "Occupy yourself." Maybe I should have become a psychiatrist. Defiantly, she flicked through the pages of the magazine. The following days, I noticed that I was the only one washing our dishes and cleaning the cell. She struggled to move her butt, even if I wanted to wipe the floor. According to her, it was too wet to sleep on the floor when I wiped the cell. Again and again we had the same debate, that I finally wiped the floor in the morning, and until she settled to sleep, the floor would guaranteed be dry by then. Finally I gave up with a remark, "It is you who have to sleep on the dirty floor, not me. I sleep in the bed. To me it doesn't matter." However, I saw not only that it was me taking out the trash, constantly cleaning the toilet, sink and shower, and also made this clear to her. She responded completely exaggerated, hysterical, even wanting to move then in another cell. Hopefully, I thought secretly. As two more women were accommodated in the cell, she changed her mind and wanted to stay suddenly. Again I got my claustrophobia and knew that a hard time was ahead of me. Since two other prisons had been closed, this division was bursting at the seams. Each cell was now occupied by 4 or 5 inmates. Most of them arranged themselves somehow, however, not so in my cell. Here was announced daily guerrilla warfare, which I now fought out with 3 Brazilians. On the second day, after the arrival of the other 2, they decided that one of them would be sharing the bed with me, because it was supposedly practiced in other cells also. Of course, this was not the case. At a meeting of all the foreigners, I learned that the Brazilians did not endure if a gringa foreigner was occupying a bed while they slept on the floor. The question was discussed whether it made sense if all the foreign women were separately accommodated in one pavilion. As always, I could not keep my mouth shut and spoke out my opinion that this was not a good idea. Instead, Brazilians and foreigners should share the cells in the same number, like 2 foreigners and 2 Brazilians. Moreover, I expressed my thought out loud that all the alleged problems were not caused by Brazilians in general, but were just communication problems and lack of education were to blame for it. So I suggested counteracting on this evil in school by providing information and a call for more tolerance. I earned mostly nodding of agreement and an admiring glance and a nod of approval by the prison management. Claudia, whom I met personally on that day, warned me, though, that what I said could be interpreted as racist and discriminatory. This, however, I could not see at all. In a letter I wrote to her later, I told her to reiterate my position. Meanwhile, my little war went into the next round. At night, I didn't get any more sleep due to claustrophobia, heat, and the waffle. I also struggled constantly against my feeling of disgust. As always, in the evening, the water in the cells was turned off. It stunk beastly, and the three took their turns to do their big business without flushing the toilet. It was getting even dirtier, but I was either ignored or laughed at when I complained about this and the lack of respect by sniffing around in my things. It was the living hell once again. Only the hope that it would be better after the 30 days, and through the encouragement of Sandra, I was still upright.